Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my 2023 video for reviewing a couple of Jewish spec fic books I read for SciFi September. So this is a video, as stated, that coincides with some of my September reading, but I am in fact filming and posting it later in October. And as such, I didn't think I could start a video without addressing some political realities that are going on right now, especially in a video where I'm reviewing books that deal very heavily with the idea of Jewish trauma. So on the morning of October 7th, Hamas in Gaza launched an attack on Israel. Thousands of rockets made it into southern and central Israel. There were militants who infiltrated Israeli villages, killing hundreds, injuring thousands, and taking hostages. Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu has declared war, and there has been military action in Gaza, leading to renewed Palestinian suffering and death as well. This is a holiday weekend in Jewish tradition, culminating with Simchat Torah, where we celebrate the conclusion of reading the 5 books of Moses that comprise the Torah, and then starting anew again, in a never-ending cycle of tradition and ritual. Plenty of people were in the middle of joyously celebrating the holiday in Israel when this tragedy befell them. And many of the rest of us in diaspora who are part of religious communities then spent this time with our communities. Some people, more traditional, probably didn't have much idea what was going on until much later because they stayed away from phones and social media. So it's been a bittersweet time for me being with my community, processing this trauma. Many people know Israeli citizens, family, and friends personally. I've been checking in on social media on people I know of in Israel as well. It's a traumatic time, and although it's part of a looping cycle of violence, there's a unprecedented element in regards to this surprise attack and how many Israelis have been hurt, killed, or captured. I've tried to script this video, which is why I look down at my phone sometimes, but then sitting in front of the camera, I'm trying to distill things a little more succinctly. And the major thing I'd want to say is my ardent belief in how reading can foster empathy. There are some people on the left and right who seem to use reading and books as a gateway into activism, like on the right, especially in the United States. There's a lot of people who call themselves activists who are instilling a lot of book bans regarding books that they read that make them uncomfortable or angry because it's about life experiences that they don't personally share. And I know in some corners of the left, people talk about reading books, especially regarding matters of injustice, and using them as a jumping off point to become activists, protesting systemic issues, standing up for marginalized groups, and maybe changing some policies as well. But I'm going to wave my little flag about the power of reading to inculcate a sense of empathy on its own, regardless of proactive activism, especially when matters of injustice can't be distilled into white hats versus black hats. In that vein, I recently reviewed this book, We Just Want to Live Here by Amal Rifaie, Adelia Einbinder, and Silke Temple, which I've talked about a little bit on this channel. And it's a book from 20 years ago, an epistolary nonfiction book where an Israeli and Palestinian teenager exchange letters back and forth to try and understand realities from each other's points of view. It's a very short and approachable book about this long and complicated conflict, and I will leave my Goodreads review linked down below. Books, with their access to interiority, provide us with a way to see the humanness in others that few other mediums can. And I think an important way to challenge the cycles of hate is to refuse to dehumanize our fellow people. And with that, I'll thank you for your time for that digression and hope you stick around for my thoughts on reading these two books in tandem with one another. This is Thistlefoot by GennaRose Nethercott, and these are Burning Girls and Other Stories by Veronica Schanoes. So Thistlefoot, I think, was a critical darling of Jewish fantasy or Jewish magical realism, published last year. It is a retelling of the Slavic Baba Yaga myth. Baba Yaga is a sort of Slavic witchy outsider who has a house on chicken legs. And Nethercott decided to remake this figure as a Jewish woman living in a shtetl in Ukraine, in current-day Ukraine, whose shtetl or village falls victim to a pogrom from the White Army during the very end of the Russian Empire. And this is based off of her own family history. But the crux of the story follows modern-day Yaga siblings, Isaac and Bellatine, and they get the inheritance of this house on chicken legs from their ancestor Baba Yaga, and they decide to take it on the road and perform a puppet show. And I love the writing in this. It's so quirky and engaging, and Bellatine and Isaac really came alive for me, and it was fun to follow them as they ultimately tangled with the villain, the antagonist of the piece, called the Long Shadow Man, who sort of awoke when the house that Bellatine called Thistlefoot awoke. And his goal generally is to erase the memory of the Jews of this pogrom, so that nobody remembers their history. So not only are they dead, but they're not remembered. So this is very much a book about generational trauma and how it manifests in later generations. And then she specifically has backstories for Isaac and Bellatine, how it's impacted their personal lives. And also, you know, this is a magical realism book, and also a magical realism sort of world conceit, where it's not unusual necessarily for people to see a house with chicken legs, and there's examples in this world of other traumatic events impacting structures around the world. There's a lot of commentary in here as well about trauma in U.S. history, since this takes place in the U.S. And also, Isaac and Bellatine have magical powers, if you were, that have manifested due to this trauma. And part of the book really is about them learning how to deal with it, and sort of embrace this reality. And so the parts of this book, I think, that truly moved me the most, especially, you know, in the writing too, because Nethercott is a poet, is how she talked about trauma and used this magical realism to talk specifically about the Jewish trauma of survivors of the Russian Empire. And in part, you know, we're following Isaac and Bellatine in the present, but then Thistlefoot itself is narrating through folklore mostly Baba Yaga's life and the ultimate pogrom that found her community about 100 years before. But I do think the ultimate theme Nethercott is trying to get to is well established in this quote: "What begins as a story of sorrow can be acknowledged, held like a sweetheart to the chest, rocked and sung to. And then it can be set down to sleep. It can become an offering, a lantern, an ember to lead you through the dark." And that's, I think, her thesis on how to live with personal and generational trauma. In a straight realist storyline, Isaac and Bellatine's personal magic might be recontextualized as something that only exists in their heads. But by writing a fabulous story, Nethercott showcases how this trauma is bigger than something that can be solved with pills or counseling. And it's indeed a metaphysical reality that survivors of generational trauma carry with us. And this is how Thistlefoot describes it when she's trying to describe the pogrom in Baba Yaga's shtetl. Malka's flame burns for 1 hour, and then 1 day, 1 year. It has not stopped burning since, and I have not stopped running. You were warned. This story as it is, not the story as we wish it were. But then, it is not a story at all. It is our world. A dead child is a dead child. A massacre is a massacre. Memories must be told. Hens beget hens, mothers beget children who beget daughters of their own. Generations pass and suddenly we forget. Our descendants are born, yearning, and they don't know why, for they have forgotten. Their hands are full of fire, their legs are trembling to flee. A body remembers. The soured air remembers. We cannot forget. I cannot forget. And if I am to remember, so too, I vow, will you. Future Rachel here, because as I'm editing this video, I've realized I didn't say anything very specifically about Nethercott, how she wrote Baba Yaga and what Baba Yaga means, particularly in Thistlefoot. So the Baba Yaga chapters, they're always narrated by the house Thistlefoot, and there's always a folkloric aspect. There's always a bit of magic in them, like creating daughters out of teeth, of human teeth, and selling eggs at the market that have secrets inside that people need, like ammunition in some cases. Sometimes Baba Yaga can be incredibly selfish, a lot of the time, even when she cuts down a man who was killed for being a communist and says she'll set him free, but only after he performs acts of vengeance, and also trying to keep her daughter safe. So there's a lot of back and forth, and Thistlefoot says throughout that she doesn't see Baba Yaga as angelic, but also not as a villain. So Baba Yaga is like less of a character and sort of more of an idea that really Thistlefoot is putting together, and her sections are very much about saying, well, maybe it happened like this, maybe it happened like that. This is a folk tale, this is not real life, and in that she, I think, is trying to make Baba Yaga more of a figurehead for all of Jews, and that is her point of taking Baba Yaga and some of the myths from the Slavic legend and putting it into a Jewish space. And maybe she most fully gets to Nethercott through Thistlefoot why she took Baba Yaga out of a Gentile space and put her into a Jewish space, and what that means, with this quote near the end as the story starts to maybe take a little bit more of a dip toward realism. There lives a woman in the shtetl of Gedenkrovka, the region of Cherkazy, the Empire of Russia. The Gentiles in the outskirts of the town, they believe this woman is a demon, for she lives in a house unlike all other houses. They say she can make a child from a tooth. They say she feeds these children chicken noodle soup brothed with lost travelers' bones. Do not go near Baba Yaga's hut, or she will put a candle in your skull and make a lantern of you, they say. The Jews in the market, they do not care if she is a witch or a cucumber, so long as she is not a shiksa, and so long as she brings healthy eggs to sell, and so long as she keeps her daughters from biting the other children. The Jews, they have heard their people called demon before. They learned to stop listening. So Thistlefoot, I think, is a lot about remembering the trauma, but also the beauty of the past, or the quirkiness, as Baba Yaga is rewritten kind of like as a Yiddish character, the way Sholem Aleichem or maybe Isaac Bashevis Singer might have imagined her. And I loved how I feel like Nethercott then took that whimsy and brought it into the present with Isaac and Bellatine. But in Burning Girls and Other Stories by Veronica Schanoes, I think there's a lot more trying to run from the ways that an attempt for revolution has gone wrong. This is a short story collection that's a little more uneven for me. There's some that are very Jewish that really spoke to me, and then the ones that aren't didn't so much, which I think really brought to the fore for me the way I relate to fabulism and magical realism, which is I don't do it much at all unless I have a personal connection to maybe the folklore and memory and history being discussed. But there is some very clever stuff in there. It's in the non-Jewish stories as well, where Schanoes dissects folk tales and fairy tales in feminist history. But my favorites of her stories. The first and the last really spoke to me. They're the very Jewish ones. The first takes place in 17th century Germany. It's a retelling of The Jew Amongst the Thorns, which is an actual fairy tale, an anti-Semitic fairy tale, where a Jew is cast as this evil slave driver type guy who is coerced through magic to confess his evil ways, dance until he's cut up by thorns, and then he ultimately has to admit to his evil and his kill, and is righteously killed for it. So of course in this retelling, the Jewish character, the father of the main character, is tricked by someone with a magical fiddle, and is ultimately killed by a town predisposed to anti-Semitic thoughts. And our protagonist gets the chance to enact revenge by invoking the matronit, which is well, what Schanoes sees maybe as a precursor to the Hebrew God, and some Jewish scholars then sort of saw the matronit as the Shekinah, which is the female aspect of God. But anyway, what this daughter does is she enacts revenge, but there is a question at the end about how big this revenge should go. She sees through the town how widespread the anti-Semitism is, and what to do about that anti-Semitism is a big question. And in the last story, which is the titular story, it takes place in Poland in the around the 20th century, and particularly in Białystok, which was a modern city. There was a lot of hope that Jews were assimilated enough and Christians were, enlightened enough that violence against Jews might ultimately end, but it is, of course, predicated on one sympathetic police chief who, when he dies, bad things befall them. And the protagonist's grandmother is sort of this healer, wise woman who makes a deal with the Lilith, which is a type of demon in Jewish folklore, to try and get her family out to America by selling off the youngest child, which the protagonist doesn't like at all. And ultimately, most of the family is killed in pogroms, and the protagonist and her sister go to America, where they find ultimately there's other, magical elements with the Lilith following them, but I think the ultimate takeaway is the way that America was not the, promised land of freedom and lack of persecution that they hoped for, that there was a different type of persecution and a different type of burning that followed them there. But the main story I thought I'd talk about here, of course, is Emma Goldman Takes Tea with the Baba Yaga, since we are revisiting the myth of the Baba Yaga, which Schanoes, I think, leaves much more as a distinctly Slavic myth. But Emma Goldman was a real-life Jewish person of Jewish descent who was born in the Russian Empire. She turned to anarchy and politics to try and build a better future. She was well known in the U.S. as well, where she lived. But in this story, she's struggling with the reality that the Bolshevik Revolution she helped might ultimately, provide a better reality for everyone, ultimately turned into something quite sinister and hateful, filled with its own hierarchies and cruelties. And so basically, it's at first Schanoes sort of briefly recaps a lot of Goldman's life until she's back in the Russian Empire, and in a section called The Fantasy, she wanders into the woods and comes across the Baba Yaga, who, in Thistlefoot, the Baba Yaga is a figure of the Jewish community, but the Baba Yaga here is this outsider to all communities, I think, and is sort of this figure of cynicism that is trying to lure Goldman away to take her place. And so her argument is, "You are tired of life, Emily. Very well. I understand, for I too felt that way many years ago. And that is when I became the Baba Yaga, when I took my predecessor's place, and she became one with Mother Russia. And now I feel my old bones are longing to dissolve into the earth, and it is time for another to step in and take the role and occupy this cottage. And Emily, I think that should be you. Goldman raised her eyebrows. But I am not Baba Yaga. But you could be, returned the other. It is a title, not a name, and I can pass it on to you, just as the previous Baba Yaga passed it on to me. Goldman considered the prospect with perhaps more equanimity than one might expect from a committed atheist who held that the physical world was all that existed. What does it involve, being Baba Yaga? She asked. The Baba Yaga was briefly unable to meet Goldman's gaze. Not as much as it once did, she admitted finally. The Russian populace is less frightened of my cooking pot than it once was. They are less gullible, you mean, said Goldman, less inclined to believe in fairy tales. The Baba Yaga clucked her tongue and shook her head. Just as gullible as ever, Emily. They just believe in different fairy tales now. I really liked that. It reminded me again in Thistlefoot of the Long Shadow Man, who in the present-day storyline especially was able to entice people to do violent acts by stoking their fears of the other. So in a way, that's like how I see believing in a different fairy tale in this story as well, where a revolution that was supposed to like bring about utopia turned into another form of pulling people down and calling people other and, blaming them for all your problems. I think that's the fairy tale that she's alluding to. And it's certainly the fairy tale that in Thistlefoot, the Long Shadow Man inculcated in people. This story in particular is also the one where Schanoes broke the fourth wall and talked about why she wrote it, because she herself came from a family of Marxists and communists who broke from Soviet thinking as the government was turning a lot on the people in the 90s. And this, I think, is Schanoes struggling with how she wants to be an anarchist, how she is striving for a revolution that could lead to a utopia, but that doesn't seem to be the way that these realities work in the real world. And this quote in particular hits me differently now than it did when I first read it before the events of October 7th. She also alludes to a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Ones Who Walk Away from the Omelas, which is about a utopian society that's predicated on the suffering of a single child. And this is also reminding me I would love to read more Le Guin in the future. Where do those who walk away from the Omelas go? There is nowhere to go, nowhere moral, nowhere safe, nowhere that does not depend on the suffering of some child. That means you have to stay and fight and make the revolution as kind as possible. In the final analysis, I probably am not an anarchist. I think one must have far more faith in people than I possess to be an anarchist. But I believe in this. You do not achieve freedom by abridging people's rights. You do not create joy by enforcing misery. The means do justify the ends because there is no end. There are just ongoing moments. And that about covers it for me now. I will leave links to my Goodreads reviews of both Thistlefoot and Burning Girls linked down below. I'll be back on this channel with something a lot more fun and breezy, a TBR game that I play quarterly, the BookTube Spin, which I've already filmed because I get so excited about doing these things, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. I hope these books gave you as much to think about as they did me. I hope you stay safe wherever you are, embrace empathy and our communal connection to one another. Thanks so much for watching again, and I'll see you next time.